In the heart of the Galactic Summit, where representatives from dozens of advanced species convened to decide the fate of interstellar politics, humanity was a newcomer. The grand chamber glittered with holographic displays and iridescent lights, its domed ceiling a projection of swirling galaxies. Delegates, each representing their respective species, were seated in circular tiers that overlooked the central podium. The air was thick with tension, as ancient rivalries and unspoken alliances simmered beneath polite diplomacy. Humans, seated at a modest table near the back, threw curious glances. Compared to towering reptilian Zarnites or the ethereal, light-based Thelanians, the humans appeared unremarkable. Yet their presence alone was a statement. Despite being one of the youngest races to achieve faster-than-light travel, they had earned a place at the summit due to their rapid advancements and knack for survival in hostile environments. Some delegates viewed humanity as a promising ally. Others saw them as a potential threat. The day's agenda was contentious, a proposal to limit resource mining on newly discovered planets. The Thelanians had argued for strict regulations to preserve ecological balance. The Zarnites countered, advocating for unrestricted exploitation, claiming their empire's survival depended on it. Most species leaned toward one side or the other, but the humans remained silent. Whispers spread. Were they undecided or biding their time? As the debate grew heated, an imposing Zarnite delegate stood, his scaled form shimmering in the chamber's light. His voice, deep and resonant, echoed through the hall. "Humanity's silence is telling," he growled, directing his fiery gaze toward the humans' table. "Perhaps they lack the wisdom to contribute to matters of galactic importance. Or perhaps," he sneered, "they simply cannot comprehend the stakes." There was a pause, a collective intake of breath. All eyes turned to the humans. The leader of the human delegation, a composed figure with sharp features and a quiet intensity, rose slowly. The room seemed to hold its breath. "Comprehend the stakes," the human replied calmly, their voice carrying just enough steel to command attention. "We understand them all too well. For humanity, survival has always been a high-stakes game. On Earth, we've faced extinction-level events, endured self-inflicted wounds, and battled forces far greater than ourselves. Yet here we stand." A murmur rippled through the chamber. The Thelanian delegate, a shimmering silhouette of light, tilted its head as if in curiosity. "And what perspective does humanity bring to this debate?" it asked, its voice a melodic hum. The human smiled faintly. "Perspective, perhaps, that others lack. You see, on Earth, we've learned that what may seem insignificant can hold immense power. Take, for example, our so-called poisons." That word hung in the air, drawing frowns and puzzled expressions from the delegates. The Zarnite delegate scoffed. "Poisons? What relevance could your primitive toxins have in this assembly?" The human's gaze didn't waver. Relevance lies in understanding the balance of power. On Earth, what we once considered deadly has, time and again, become a tool for survival. Arsenic, once a feared poison, found its place in medicine. Venoms from our most dangerous creatures became cures. Even the harshest environments taught us resilience. Poison, in essence, is just a matter of perspective. The room grew quiet as delegates processed the implications. Humanity's resilience had always been a topic of intrigue, but this framing was new. The human leaned forward slightly, their tone growing more intense. "And so," they continued, "when we speak of mining regulations, we do not see it as a simple matter of resources or conservation. We see the poison in unchecked greed, the poison in ignoring the fragile balance of life. But we also see the potential for transformation, turning poison into progress." The Thelanian delegate's light form shimmered brighter, a sign of deep contemplation. The Zarnite, however, was less impressed. "A poetic argument," it snarled, "but words do not mine ore or feed empires." The human met the Zarnite's glare without flinching. "No, they don't. But actions do, and humanity's actions have always spoken louder than words." Before the Zarnite could retort, The chamber's lights flickered. A low hum reverberated through the hall, signaling an incoming emergency transmission. The holographic display at the center of the room lit up, revealing a grim-faced technician from the summit's security team. "Delegates," the technician announced, "a chemical contaminant has been detected in the summit's water supply. Preliminary analysis suggests it's a neurotoxin, lethal to most species present." Panic erupted in the chamber. Delegates whispered frantically, some reaching for communication devices to contact their ships. The humans, however, remained unusually calm. "What is the source of the toxin?" the Thelanian delegate demanded, their light form pulsing erratically. The technician hesitated. "Unknown at this time. We are working to identify." "Identify nothing," the Zarnite delegate interrupted, standing abruptly. "This is sabotage, likely the work of some faction opposed to unity." Its accusing eyes fell on the humans, perhaps a young, ambitious species seeking to disrupt the established order. The human leader rose again, their expression unreadable. "That's an interesting theory," they said evenly, "but pointing fingers won't solve the problem." "And what would you propose?" the Zarnite sneered. "You humans claim to know poison so well. Can you cure this one?" The human tilted their head, a ghost of a smile playing on their lips. "Perhaps we can." Their calm statement drew incredulous stares. The Thelanian delegate's light dimmed in confusion. "Explain," it said. "Our scientists are familiar with a range of neurotoxins," the human replied. "Some from Earth's fauna, others from extraterrestrial sources we've encountered. Given the right resources, we might be able to neutralize this one. But we'll need cooperation." "Cooperation?" the Zarnite growled. "Why should we trust you?" The human's expression hardened. "Because the alternative is watching this summit dissolve into chaos, or worse, watching lives be lost. You may not trust us, but you can't deny that we have a vested interest in ensuring everyone walks away from this alive." The chamber fell into an uneasy silence. Delegates exchanged wary glances, weighing their options. The Thelanian delegate finally spoke, its voice softer now. "If humanity can neutralize the threat, we must allow them the opportunity." The Zarnite delegate looked as though it wanted to argue but held its tongue. The stakes were too high. The human leader nodded. "We'll need immediate access to the toxin samples and the summit's laboratory facilities. Time is critical." As the delegates reluctantly agreed and security personnel escorted the humans to the lab, the chamber buzzed with speculation. Had humanity's knowledge of poisons truly positioned them as the galaxy's unlikely saviors, or was there more to their calm confidence than they let on? In the dimly lit corridor leading to the labs, the human delegation walked with purpose. "They don't trust us," one of them murmured. "They don't have to," the leader replied. "They just need to believe we can save them." Unbeknownst to the other delegates, the humans carried a secret weapon, an understanding of adaptation, innovation, and the fine line between poison and cure. Whether their gamble would pay off remained to be seen, but one thing was certain. The eyes of the galaxy were now firmly fixed on humanity. The laboratory was a hive of activity. Sterile white walls gleamed under harsh lighting, and the air hummed with the sound of advanced machinery. Human scientists, dressed in uniforms that bore Earth's insignia, worked quickly but methodically. They were surrounded by holographic displays showing chemical breakdowns, molecular structures, and real-time simulations. Each movement was precise, driven by years of training and an almost instinctive understanding of their craft. The human leaders stood at the center of it all, watching the team with an intense focus. Though calm on the surface, they knew the weight of the moment. This wasn't just about neutralizing the toxin, it was about proving humanity's place in the galaxy. If they failed, it would reinforce the doubts and distrust already swirling around their presence at the summit. Worse, lives were on the line, not just human lives, but those of every species gathered under this roof. "How's it coming?" the leader asked, stepping closer to a researcher who was examining a sample of the contaminated water. The researcher glanced up briefly, their hands steady as they manipulated a holographic model. The toxin is complex, likely synthetic. It's designed to target neural pathways, but it's adaptable, almost like it's learning as it interacts with different species biology. The leader frowned. A bioweapon, then. Deliberate. Almost certainly, the researcher confirmed. But whoever designed it underestimated something. What's that? The researcher allowed a faint smile. Us. Earth's ecosystems have thrown everything imaginable at us. Viruses, bacteria, toxins from plants and animals. Our immune systems and our scientists have had to outthink nature at every turn. This toxin is dangerous, yes, but it's not invincible. The leader nodded, encouraged but cautious. Work quickly. We don't have much time. Meanwhile, in the main chamber, the delegates' unease was palpable. Conversations buzzed in low murmurs, each species speculating on the origins of the toxin and the human's ability to counteract it. The Thelanian delegate, glowing dimly with stress, approached the Zarnite. "You seem unusually quiet," the Thelanian remarked, its melodic voice soft. "Have you nothing to say about the humans now?" The Zarnite's scales rippled with agitation. Their arrogance is maddening. They act as though they alone can solve this crisis. "And if they can?" the Thelanian asked. The Zarnite's eyes narrowed. "Then perhaps they are more dangerous than we feared." Back in the lab, the team's progress was steady but fraught with challenges. The toxin's adaptive nature meant it resisted traditional neutralization methods. The humans had to innovate, combining known techniques with experimental approaches. This compound might destabilize the toxin's core structure, one scientist suggested, pointing to a glowing formula on the holographic screen. "It's risky," another argued. "If it reacts poorly, we could accelerate its effects. Then we'll refine it," the leader interjected. "But we don't have the luxury of time to play it safe, calculate the probabilities, and make adjustments." Hours ticked by, each moment filled with the tension of life or death stakes. In the lab's corner, a younger scientist worked quietly, their eyes scanning data with relentless focus. They had a reputation for thinking outside the box, and now was no exception. "What if we don't attack the toxin directly?" they said aloud, drawing the attention of the room. "What if we disrupt its adaptability instead?" The others paused, intrigued. "Explain," the leader prompted. "It's learning because it's feeding off the biosignatures of the species it encounters," the scientist explained. "If we introduce a false signature, something it can't adapt to, it might destabilize." The leader considered the idea, their expression thoughtful. "Do it. Build the model and test it. If it works, we'll scale it up." As the humans raced against time, the summit's delegates grew more restless. Whispers of blame and conspiracy spread like wildfire. Some accused rival species of orchestrating the attack, while others pointed fingers at the humans themselves. "Convenient, isn't it?" one delegate muttered to another. "The humans arrive, and suddenly we face a crisis only they claim to understand." The Thelanian delegate overheard and intervened. "Baseless accusations serve no one. If humanity can resolve this, we owe them gratitude, not suspicion." "Or submission," the Zarnite delegate interjected darkly. The humans remained largely unaware of the growing tensions outside the lab, focused entirely on their task. The younger scientist's theory quickly proved promising. Their model showed that a synthetic biosignature could, in fact, confuse the toxin, rendering it inert. The challenge now was to produce it on a scale large enough to neutralize the contamination. "This will work," the younger scientist said with quiet conviction. "It has to." The leader placed a hand on their shoulder. "Good work. Let's finish this." As the final preparations were made, the leader stepped out of the lab to address the summit. The chamber fell silent as they entered, all eyes on them. "We have a solution," the leader announced, their voice steady. "It's untested on this scale, but our simulations are promising. With your approval, we'll deploy it immediately." The delegates erupted in a mix of relief and skepticism. And if it fails, the Zarnite delegate demanded. The leader's gaze was unwavering. Then we'll keep trying until it doesn't. But know this, humanity doesn't back down from a challenge. We face them head-on, no matter the odds. The Thelanian delegate rose, its light glowing brighter. We must allow them to proceed. Delaying further only increases the risk to everyone here. Reluctantly, the other delegates agreed. The humans returned to the lab, where the team worked tirelessly to prepare the biosignature compound for dispersal. The tension was suffocating, but the humans operated with a quiet determination born from centuries of overcoming the impossible. Finally, the moment came. The compound was loaded into the summit's environmental systems, ready to be released into the water supply. As the leader gave the final command, they couldn't help but feel the weight of the galaxy's gaze on them. The dispersal process began, the compound spreading through the summit's intricate network of pipes and reservoirs. Monitors displayed real-time data, showing the toxin's activity slowly diminishing. It was working, but not fast enough. "We need more time," a scientist said urgently. The leader glanced at the monitors, their jaw tightening. Time was a luxury they didn't have. The toxin was adapting again, fighting against the compound. For humanity, failure wasn't just an option, it was a threat to their credibility and their very survival. As the data continued to stream in, the leader's mind raced. There had to be another way to push the compound's effectiveness. And if there wasn't, they'd have to invent one. The future of the summit, and humanity's place in the galaxy, hung by a thread. The lab buzzed with a frantic energy, each second feeling like an eternity. Scientists moved with a mix of precision and urgency, their faces etched with the strain of the moment. Data streamed across screens in a cascade of glowing symbols and graphs, each update more ominous than the last. The toxin was proving to be more adaptable than even the most pessimistic predictions. It wasn't just resisting the compound. It was evolving faster than anyone had anticipated. The leaders stood at the center of the chaos, their eyes fixed on the main monitor. Every instinct told them to act, to find a way to turn the tide. But the options were narrowing. They could feel the weight of countless lives pressing down on them, the unspoken question lingering in the air. What if humanity failed? How long until full saturation? The leader asked, their voice calm but tight with tension. 10 minutes, maybe less, one of the senior scientists replied, glancing nervously at the screens. But the toxin's rate of adaptation is increasing. If we can't amplify the compound's effect, we will. The leader cut in firmly, refusing to entertain the thought of failure. Keep working. The younger scientist, whose idea had initially offered hope, was huddled over a separate console, their hands flying across the controls. They were running a new simulation, one that pushed the boundaries of the compound's capabilities. Their mind raced with possibilities, drawing on every fragment of knowledge they'd accumulated over years of study. "I think I have something," they announced suddenly, their voice breaking through the tense silence. The entire room turned toward them. "If we introduce a secondary compound, something that specifically targets the toxin's adaptive mechanisms, we might be able to shut it down completely." The senior scientist frowned, skeptical. "A secondary compound? That's untested. If it reacts poorly with the first one, it's a risk," the younger scientist admitted, "but it's a calculated one. The simulations show a high probability of success." The leader stepped closer, studying the data. "How fast can we produce it?" 5 minutes, the younger scientist replied, their voice steady despite the pressure. "Do it," the leader said, "and prepare for immediate deployment." While the team scrambled to synthesize the secondary compound, the situation in the summit chamber grew increasingly dire. Delegates were visibly shaken, their confidence in humanity's efforts wavering with each passing moment. The Zarnite delegate, who had been one of the loudest critics of humanity, now paced restlessly, their scales shifting in agitation. "This delay is unacceptable," they hissed, addressing the Thelanian delegate. If the humans cannot resolve this, we must consider other options. The Thelanians' glow flickered with unease. What other options? There's no time for debate, and the humans are our best chance. Or our greatest mistake, the Zarnite countered. We've placed our trust in a species that thrives on chaos, hoping they can save us from it. As the argument escalated, the toxin continued to spread. Several smaller species, already more vulnerable to its effects, had to be moved to isolated chambers where life support systems could be manually adjusted to slow the impact. The sight of their suffering only heightened the tension, turning the chamber into a boiling pot of fear and suspicion. Back in the lab, the secondary compound was nearly ready. The younger scientists monitored the final stages of synthesis, their hands trembling slightly. They couldn't shake the thought of what failure would mean, not just for the summit, but for humanity's reputation. This was more than a crisis. It was a test, one that could define their species in the eyes of the galaxy. "Compound is ready," the senior scientist announced, their voice cutting through the oppressive silence. "But there's a complication." The leader turned sharply. "What kind of complication?" "We've detected fluctuations in the summit's environmental systems," the senior scientist explained. "If the dispersal isn't perfectly timed, the secondary compound could destabilize before it reaches full saturation." "Then we'll time it perfectly," the leader said, their tone leaving no room for doubt. "Load the compound and prepare for deployment." As the team worked to integrate the secondary compound into the dispersal system, the leader addressed the group. "This is it. No second chances. We're not just fighting a toxin. We're fighting for trust, for respect, for everything humanity stands for. Let's make it count." The dispersal began, the secondary compound merging with the first in a carefully calibrated release. The room was silent except for the hum of machinery and the steady beep of monitors tracking the toxin's response. At first, nothing seemed to change. The toxin continued to spread, its tendrils snaking through the summit's systems with an almost malevolent intent. "Come on," the younger scientist muttered under their breath, their eyes glued to the data. And then, finally, a shift. The monitors began to show a reduction in the toxin's activity. It wasn't a dramatic drop, but it was enough to spark a flicker of hope. "It's working," the senior scientist said, their voice barely above a whisper. But the celebration was short-lived. Alarms blared suddenly, red lights flashing across the lab. The toxin was fighting back, its adaptation mechanisms kicking into overdrive. The secondary compound was holding, but only barely. "We need more power to the dispersal system," the younger scientist said urgently. "If we can increase the output." "It's too risky," the senior scientist interjected. "The system could overload." "We don't have a choice," the leader said firmly. "Do it." As the team worked frantically to boost the system's output, the tension in the summit chamber reached a breaking point. Delegates were shouting over one another, their fear and frustration spilling over. "If this fails, we're doomed," one of them cried, their voice trembling. "It won't fail," the Thelanian delegate said, though their own glow had dimmed with uncertainty. The Zarnite delegate sneered. "And what makes you so sure?" "Faith. Hope. Neither will save us now." In the lab, the dispersal system groaned under the strain of increased power. Sparks flew from one of the consoles, and a technician rushed to contain the damage. The monitors showed the toxin's activity continuing to decrease, but the progress was agonizingly slow. "We're at critical levels," the senior scientist warned. "If we push any further." "We're not stopping," the leader said, their voice hard with determination. "We see this through." The younger scientist adjusted the controls one final time, their heart pounding. This was the breaking point, the moment that would determine everything. They could feel the eyes of their team on them, the weight of countless lives resting on their shoulders. The system surge, a final burst of power coursing through the dispersal network. The compound flooded the summit's systems, saturating every corner with the synthetic signature designed to neutralize the toxin. The room held its breath. the seconds stretching into eternity. And then, the monitor showed a sudden, dramatic drop in the toxin's activity. It was working, but the fight wasn't over yet. The system groaned again, the strain threatening to tear it apart. The team could only watch, waiting for the outcome that would decide their fate. As the dispersal system roared to its limits, the air in the lab was thick with anticipation. The tension was so palpable that even the hum of machinery seemed muted under the collective weight of hope and dread. On the monitors, the toxin's activity plummeted further, its once malevolent grip on the summit systems now visibly unraveling. Cheers of cautious relief began to ripple through the team, but the leader remained fixed on the data. Something felt off. Too convenient, too clean. "Run a diagnostic sweep," the leader ordered, their voice cutting through the brief celebration. "I want to make sure this isn't a trick." The younger scientist hesitated, confused. "The readings are clear. The toxin's neutralized. It's over, isn't it?" "Just run it," the leader insisted, their gut instinct screaming that they were missing something. As the team initiated the sweep, the summit chamber erupted in a mix of cautious applause and lingering doubt. Delegates leaned into whispered conversations, their fear beginning to dissipate but not entirely replaced by trust. The Thelanian delegate cautiously approached the central console, addressing the Zarnite with a faint note of optimism. "It appears the humans have succeeded," the Thelanian said, their glow brightening slightly. "Perhaps we underestimated their ingenuity." The Zarnite delegate crossed their arms, their scales still shifting in irritation. "Or perhaps this is simply the first step in another disaster. Do not forget, they caused this situation in the first place." Before the Thelanian could respond, a sudden alarm pierced the air. In the lab, the diagnostic sweep displayed results that sent a chill through the room. The toxin had not been completely eradicated. It had retreated. Hidden deep within the summit's core systems, it was regrouping, mutating into something even more insidious. "It's evolving again," the senior scientist said, their voice trembling. "This isn't just an adaptive toxin anymore. It's learning." The room fell silent. The implications were horrifying. If the toxin had gained the ability to analyze and counteract human efforts, it was no longer just a chemical threat. It was a living, thinking adversary. The leader's mind raced as they considered their next move. "Shut down all non-essential systems," the leader commanded. "We need to contain it before it spreads again." As technicians scrambled to comply, a new wave of chaos unfolded in the summit chamber. The delegates, already on edge, began to panic as their monitors flickered with erratic patterns. A low hum filled the air, growing louder with each passing second, until it resonated like a physical force. The Thelanian delegate clutched their head, their glow dimming to a weak flicker. "What's happening?" they asked, their voice strained. "The toxin," the Zarnite delegate growled, their tone filled with both fear and grim satisfaction. "It's not just targeting systems, it's targeting us." In the lab, the leader watched helplessly as the data confirmed their worst fears. The toxin had evolved beyond physical systems. It was now emitting a frequency designed to disrupt the neural patterns of sentient beings. It wasn't just a weapon anymore. It was a predator, hunting its prey in ways they hadn't anticipated. "We need to evacuate the summit," the younger scientist said urgently. "If this frequency continues, it could incapacitate everyone in the chamber." "We can't evacuate," the leader countered. "If the toxin escapes into the wider galaxy, it could spread to countless worlds. This ends here." "But how?" the senior scientist asked. "It's adapting faster than we can counter it. Every move we make, it's already 2 steps ahead." The leader stared at the monitors, their mind racing for a solution. There had to be a way to outthink the toxin, to stay ahead of its relentless evolution. And then, in a flash of insight, they realized the answer wasn't in trying to destroy it. It was in tricking it. "What if we feed it false data?" the leader said suddenly. "Convince it that it's already won, that there's no need to adapt further." The younger scientist's eyes lit up with understanding. You mean, create a simulated system for it to invade? Something so convincing it doesn't realize it's a trap. Exactly, the leader said. If we can lure it into a controlled environment, we can isolate it completely. But we'll need to act fast. The plan was risky, bordering on desperate, but it was their only shot. As the team worked to construct the simulation, the toxin's frequency grew more intense. Delegates in the chamber began to collapse, their bodies unable to withstand the relentless assault. The Philanian delegate struggled to stay upright, their globe now barely visible. Hurry, the younger scientist urged, their hands moving frantically over the controls. We don't have much time. In the summit chamber, the Zarnite delegate, despite their earlier skepticism, now found themselves standing guard over the Philanian. Their scales, once shimmering with disdain, now glinted with a grim determination. Stay with me, the Zarnite muttered, their tone uncharacteristically soft. We will survive this. As the simulation neared completion, the leader issued a final command. Deploy the signal. Let's see if this works. The lab fell silent as the simulated system went live, its artificial data streams designed to mimic the summit's core functions. For a tense moment, nothing happened. And then the toxin shifted. Its activity spiked as it began to pour itself into the simulated system, lured by the promise of new territory to conquer. It's taking the bait, the senior scientist said, their voice filled with cautious hope. But it's not fully committed yet. The leader nodded. We need to keep it occupied. Increase the complexity of the simulation. Make it think it's encountering resistance. As the team worked to maintain the illusion, the toxin's presence in the real systems continued to wane. Delegates in the chamber began to recover, their strength returning as the frequency's grip weakened. The Philanian delegate managed to sit up, their glow flickering back to life. What did they do? They asked weakly, looking at the Zarnite. The Zarnite delegate shook their head, a hint of reluctant admiration in their voice. Something unexpected. But the battle wasn't over yet. The toxin was still dangerously active within the simulation, and if it realized the ruse, it could retaliate with devastating force. The leader watched the monitors intently, their breath held as the final phase of the plan unfolded. Prepare the containment field, they ordered. As soon as the toxin is fully inside the simulation, we lock it down. Seconds stretched into minutes as the team waited for the toxin to commit itself completely. The room was a powder keg of nerves, every eye fixed on the screens. And then, at last, the moment came. The toxin, confident in its supposed victory, poured its remaining energy into the simulated system. Now, the leader shouted. The containment field activated, a surge of energy encapsulating the simulation. The toxin thrashed violently, realizing too late that it had been trapped. The lab erupted in cheers, but the leader didn't join in. Their eyes remained on the monitors, watching the toxin's frantic attempts to escape. It's not over, they said quietly. Not yet. The containment field pulsed with a steady hum, its energy holding the toxin in a vice-like grip. On the monitors, the simulated system flickered as the toxin lashed out, testing every corner of its prison for a weakness. The team watched in tense silence, knowing that even the smallest misstep could undo everything. In the summit chamber, the delegates remained motionless, their eyes locked on the central display that projected the lab's feed. For the first time, a glimmer of hope began to flicker among them, fragile but growing. In the lab, the leader issued rapid instructions, their voice calm but charged with urgency. Reinforce the containment field. Double-check for vulnerabilities. This thing is going to fight to the very end. The younger scientists worked furiously at their station, sweat beading on their forehead. The field's holding, but it's putting up more resistance than we anticipated. It's adapting again, even in confinement. That's why we need to act now, the leader said, their gaze fixed on the toxin's erratic movements within the simulation. We have one shot at this. Let's not waste it. The plan was simple in theory but harrowing in execution. The containment field wasn't just a cage. It was a weapon. By overloading it with energy, they could incinerate the toxin at a molecular level. But there was a risk. If the energy levels were even slightly miscalculated, the field could collapse, releasing the toxin back into the real systems with catastrophic consequences. As the team prepared to initiate the overload, a sudden spike in the toxin's activity sent alarms blaring throughout the lab. On the monitors, its movements became erratic, almost panicked. "It's figured out the simulation isn't real," the senior scientist said, their voice tinged with dread. "It's trying to breach the field." The leader's stomach dropped. They had anticipated the toxin's intelligence, but its speed of adaptation was beyond anything they'd prepared for. The containment field began to waver, its once steady hum now interspersed with ominous crackles. "Hold it together," the leader barked. "Divert all available power to the field. Whatever it takes, we can't let it break through." In the summit chamber, the delegates watched in stunned silence as the containment field on the display flickered dangerously. The Thelanian delegate turned to the Zarnite, their voice trembling. "If this fails, it won't just be us who suffer. This thing could spread to the entire galaxy." The Zarnite delegate, usually so composed, had no retort. For once, they shared the same fear. Back in the lab, the team worked with desperate precision, redirecting power from non-essential systems to the containment field. The lights dimmed, and the hum of the machines grew louder as the field stabilized. But the toxin's efforts to escape only intensified. "Overload sequence is ready," the younger scientist reported. "We're at maximum capacity. Any more, and the whole system could fail." The leader hesitated for the briefest moment, the weight of the decision pressing down on them. If they acted too soon, the toxin might survive. If they waited too long, it could escape. There was no room for error. "Activate the sequence," the leader said firmly. "Let's end this." The room filled with a blinding light as the containment field surged with energy, its hum rising to a deafening roar. On the monitors, the toxin writhed in agony, its once coherent structure disintegrating under the relentless assault. For a moment, it seemed like victory was within reach. And then, without warning, the monitors went dark. The hum of the containment field ceased, plunging the lab into an eerie silence. Panic rippled through the team as they scrambled to restore the systems. "What happened?" the younger scientist asked, their voice frantic. "Did we succeed?" Before anyone could answer, the central console flickered back to life. But instead of showing the disintegration of the toxin, it displayed a message in stark, chilling clarity. "You can't destroy me." The room froze. The toxin had found a way to communicate. It wasn't just evolving, it was taunting them. In the summit chamber, the delegates stared at the message in horror. The Thelanian delegate turned to the Zarnite, their glow dim with despair. "It's still alive," they whispered. "What do we do now?" The leader, though shaken, refused to give in to despair. They stepped forward, their voice steadied despite the fear gnawing at the edges of their resolve. "If it's talking to us, it means it's still contained. It's trying to psych us out. We need to press on." But even as they spoke, the lab's systems began to flicker again. The toxin was no longer focused solely on escaping. It was fighting back, using the very technology meant to contain it as a weapon. The younger scientist gasped as their console displayed a new warning. "It's trying to overload the containment systems. If it succeeds, it'll take out the entire summit." The leader's mind raced. They needed a solution, and fast. The containment field was compromised, the toxin was growing more aggressive by the second, and the summit's fate, and possibly the galaxy's, hung in the balance. Then, an idea struck. It was risky, untested, and could very well fail. But it was the only option they had left. "We reroute the overload," the leader said, their tone resolute. "If it's going to destroy the containment system, we let it. But we channel the energy directly into the simulation, turn its prison into a bomb. The team stared at them, the weight of the suggestion sinking in. If the plan worked, it would annihilate the toxin completely. If it failed, it could unleash chaos on an unimaginable scale. "It's our only shot," the leader said. "Do it." With grim determination, the team set to work. The lab was a flurry of activity as they rerouted power, their hands moving with practiced precision despite the stakes. In the summit chamber, the delegates watched in tense silence, their collective hope resting on the humans' desperate gamble. As the final connections were made, the leader took a deep breath. "Initiate the sequence." The lab was bathed in a blinding light as the rerouted energy surged into the simulation. The containment field collapsed, its energy redirected into a single devastating pulse. On the monitors, the toxin thrashed violently, its form disintegrating under the sheer force of the overload. And then, finally, it was gone. The screens went dark, the hum of the systems faded, and a heavy silence fell over the room. In the summit chamber, the delegates waited, holding their breath. When the monitors flickered back to life, they displayed a simple message: "Systems restored." Relief swept through the chamber like a wave. The Thelanian delegate turned to the Zarnite, their glow brightening for the first time in hours. "They did it," they said, their voice filled with awe. The Zarnite delegate nodded, their usual skepticism replaced by a rare moment of respect. Perhaps we underestimated them after all. But in the lab, the leader stared at the blank monitors, unease settling over them. Something didn't feel right. As the team celebrated around them, they couldn't shake the feeling that the toxin's final words, "YOU to destroy me," had been more than a taunt. It had been a warning. Far away, deep within the summit's backup systems, a faint, almost imperceptible line of code began to stir. The silence in the lab was deafening as the team stood motionless, their faces a mix of exhaustion and tentative relief. The monitors remained stable, displaying no signs of the toxin's presence. The air felt heavier, as though the room itself was trying to process what had just happened. It was over, or at least, it seemed to be. The leader exhaled slowly, their hands gripping the edge of the console for support. The enormity of the situation caught up with them all at once, and they allowed themselves a moment to breathe. Around them, their team began to emerge from the fog of tension. Quiet murmurs of cautious celebration spread through the lab, but no one dared to fully let their guard down just yet. In the summit chamber, the delegates exchanged looks that ranged from disbelief to awe. The Thelanian delegate finally broke the silence, their voice steady but tinged with gratitude. "It seems humanity has done what we thought impossible. You've saved not just yourselves, but all of us." The leader's voice crackled over the intercom, addressing the assembled representatives. "The threat has been neutralized, but we must remain vigilant." This wasn't just a battle of technology. It was a test of will, and I have no doubt there are more challenges ahead. Today, we proved that working together can achieve the impossible. The room erupted in a mix of applause and approving gestures, each species expressing their gratitude in their unique ways. For the first time in the summit's history, the divisions between the delegates seemed to blur, replaced by a shared sense of survival and purpose. It was a small but significant victory, not just over the toxin, but against the forces that sought to divide them. But back in the lab, the leader couldn't shake the nagging feeling that lingered at the edge of their thoughts. The toxin's final message, "You can to destroy me," echoed in their mind like a distant warning. As the team began to wind down, they turned to the younger scientist, their voice low. "I want you to run a deep system diagnostic. Check every backup, every line of code. I need to be sure." The younger scientist nodded, their face serious. "I'll start right away." Hours turned into an agonizing wait as the diagnostic ran. The summit delegates began to depart, their trust in humanity renewed. But in the lab, the tension remained. Finally, the younger scientist approached the leader, holding a datapad. The diagnostics are clear. There's no sign of the toxin anywhere. If it tried to hide, it failed. The leader nodded, but the weight in their chest didn't lift. They knew better than to ignore instincts born from experience. Still, for now, there was nothing more to do. They allowed themselves a brief moment to join their team in the break room, where laughter and relief mingled with the smell of overbrewed coffee. Across the summit station, the mood had shifted. Where once there had been mistrust and animosity, there was now a cautious optimism. The species present had witnessed not just the threat of extinction, but also the power of unity. As the Thelanian delegate prepared to depart, they turned to their human counterpart, offering a rare gesture of respect. "Your species has shown us something we had forgotten, that courage and ingenuity can overcome even the darkest of threats." The human nodded, their smile genuine but tempered with humility. "We just did what had to be done. Let's hope it's enough to keep us all moving forward." Weeks passed, and the events of the summit began to fade into history. Reports of the incident circulated across the galaxy, each retelling emphasizing humanity's role in averting disaster. The story became a symbol of resilience and cooperation, inspiring discussions about shared responsibility among the stars. The leader returned to Earth, greeted as a hero, though they brushed off the accolades with quiet modesty. They knew the real victory belonged to their team, whose tireless efforts had made the impossible possible. Life returned to a semblance of normalcy, but the leader often found themselves gazing up at the night sky, their thoughts drifting to the distant corners of the galaxy. One evening, as they sat alone in their small, cluttered office, a notification blinked on their console. It was from the younger scientist, marked with a high priority tag. The leader's heart skipped a beat as they opened the message. The screen filled with data logs, routine backups from the summit station. At first glance, everything appeared normal. But embedded deep within the code was a pattern, subtle and almost imperceptible, like a faint heartbeat. The leader's breath caught. It wasn't the toxin itself, but a residue, a fragment of its programming, dormant but present. The younger scientist's note was brief but urgent. It didn't disappear. It left a seed. The leader leaned back in their chair, the weight of the revelation pressing down on them. They knew what this meant. The toxin wasn't gone. It was waiting, biding its time. The battle at the summit had been won, but the war was far from over. For a long moment, the leader sat in silence, their gaze fixed on the blinking cursor. The galaxy might celebrate its victory, but they knew the truth. The toxin had been a reminder, a stark warning of the dangers lurking in the dark, and it was up to humanity, as well as their newfound allies, to remain vigilant. They typed a response to the younger scientist, their fingers steady despite the storm of thoughts in their mind. "We'll prepare. This time, we'll be ready." The message sent, the leader rose from their chair and stepped outside. The cool night air brushed against their skin as they looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, the remnants of the toxin lay dormant, waiting for its next opportunity. But humanity had faced the unknown before and had emerged stronger. This time would be no different.